Every now and again, creative minds, young companies, startups, and outstanding entrepreneurs challenge the status quo. They reshape a whole industry and change the way we think about certain products and services. And this usually happens when a brand follows a higher purpose. I'm not talking about profit margins, taking care of investors, or cutting costs. I'm talking about big stuff here, brands that want to change the world a bit, have real impact in whatever way they can. I'm happy to have one of those founders on my show today, Finnegan Shepard. Hey sweeties, sweet spotters and sweet people, how are you? If you want to find and share the sweet spot of your brand, you've come to the right place. I'm your host, Marc Suess, and for this episode of the Sweetspot podcast, I'm talking to Finnegan Shepard, CEO and founder of Both and the creator of Limbs. After his own transition some years ago, Finn realized that the clothing market doesn't cater to the needs of transmasculine, non-binary, or AFAB people. So he decided to found his own clothing brand, Both and rethink fashion for this audience from scratch by designing and producing clothing without any formal training or previous experience in the industry. By learning from his own experiences and listening to the needs of his customers, he created an innovative brand that is not only successful, but really loved by the audience. In our conversation, we talk about his entrepreneurial journey as well as his creative endeavors. Because studying philosophy, literature, and fiction doesn't only give Finn a unique perspective on entrepreneurship, but also inspires his creative project Limbs, where Finn investigates a single word every month in writing and in collaborations with visual artists. This is a great talk for all founders and entrepreneurs to draw inspiration from and get inspired on how your own challenges and creative fuels can add purpose to your business. So please enjoy my talk to Finnegan Shepard.
Welcome to the Sweet Side. This is the Sweetspot podcast with Marc Suess, investigating entrepreneurship, purpose, and the creative life.
Sweet people, it's my pleasure to welcome today to the show, Finn. Hey, how are you?
Doing well. Other than my hunger, which I just talked to you about, my lack of being able to keep a consistent diet in my life, I'm doing well.
Okay, perfect. Let's hope you don't pass out during the interview.
Fingers crossed. I've got my juice box.
Exactly. So the listeners already know if this episode is only 10 minutes long, you know what happened. So yeah, if you're in New Mexico right now. Which is kind of a special place, as we talked about in your life. So what brought you to New Mexico? What's happening there for you?
New Mexico is a really intense energy. I would say like it vibrates at this like very high frequency, which draws a very wide swath of diverse people. That's like right off the bat, you cross the border from Colorado into New Mexico and suddenly just the energy changes. I'm not a particularly like woo-woo person. Yeah. I wouldn't say energy is a word I use that much, but it's palpable here. So I've always felt this draw and this intrigue. And I originally tried moving down here when I got a fellowship to do an MFA at the university. Mm-hmm. And as I told you, it was a point in my life when I really thought I had checked all the boxes. I really, at that point in life, thought it was possible to sort of check all the boxes and then get to that plateau where everything was like taken care of and was easy. And it's like I was engaged to this wonderful partner and I was working on my manuscript and I was going to be a professor and I bought this old, beautiful classic car and we moved into this mining village in the mountains of New Mexico and we didn't have any service and we're kind of like off the grid and it was so romantic. And I was also going by Becca and she, her pronouns at that time. And then in the course of about 6 months, I completely overturned my life. First, we ended up opening up our relationship into this very tumultuous, polyamorous situation. Mm-hmm. I began to realize that I was going to medically transition. I realized I wanted to leave academia. My engagement fell apart. My car kept breaking down. It was just everything kind of burnt to the ground. Yeah. And I ended up leaving New Mexico, going back to Colorado. for a while to get surgery and to kind of figure out what was next. And that was the beginnings of the seed for both and these things that I'm doing now. But it really, first time around in New Mexico, total shit show. Second time around, also a shit show. And
Jesus.
Now I'm back for the third time.
So this must be a really magic place if you go there the third time after what happened before. Amazing.
Either magic or it just feels kind of inevitable. I don't know. It just feels like I'm supposed to be here. And the practical reason is I have a partner who's at the university now, a different one, a third partner in the saga, who's very wonderful, and I'm very happy with her. And I do, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, I think New Mexico is interesting in the sense that it is very affordable and it's a very diverse place. Mm-hmm. So in terms of states ranked with like the highest trans population, New Mexico is like number 3 or 4, I think. It's really high up there.
I totally didn't know that.
I think, we are socioeconomically pretty disenfranchised, and a lot of people are trying to flee the South and the Midwest. And Albuquerque is kind of this crossroads, I think, where it's like you can get there pretty easily. It has so much diversity, like ethnically and historically, and you can actually afford to live here. So it's not a thriving hub like, Silicon Valley or New York or whatever, but it's got its own kind of cool, different thing going on. And I'm feeling more and more proud to be here. I get on calls with journalists or whoever, investors, and they're all in the same places, always the same likely candidates. And they're like, where are you? I'm like, I'm in Albuquerque. They're like, what? I don't think I've ever gotten on an investment call with somebody in Albuquerque. Like, it's just out of nowhere. So yeah, trying to carve out a little space for myself and for my company here.
That's amazing. So we're going to talk about your company and every other thing you do creatively, entrepreneurially. But I'm really interested, since we started at like a very dark time in your life. It's like, if I look at you today and the things you create today, it's like a phoenix from the ashes kind of story. So is there anything you can share with people? Because I know that a lot of creative careers and also entrepreneurial spirited people have gone through ups and downs in their life. Me personally as well. Divorce, exiting my company, a lot of things happening all within a short amount of time, which sometimes is like really, it boils down to a certain time in your life when everything happens at once. So was there something in you, like a creative or maybe even already entrepreneurial spirit, that kept you going? Or did you know this is just a dark phase, there will be a better thing coming? Or what kept you going strong?
That's a good question. I mean, I think I am neurochemically very blessed. Like my neutral state of being is very happy. I'm not prone to anxiety or depression. So I'm very lucky in that regard. But I would say that when I look back on it, and the kind of advice I like to give people now is the whole notion of seasonality really speaks to me. And it's so simple, but I do think we live in an age where what we enjoy the most is the moment right after struggle. That is what all of social media is. That is, I mean, arguably what all of marketing is. It's like that split seconds difference between recognizing, challenge and struggle, and then how we overcome it. Whether it's Phoenix from the ashes or a transformation picture of me before top surgery and me, ripped now on testosterone or whatever. And in a way, I can't really blame people. Like that's a driver. That's what keeps you going. If you didn't think you'd reach that point, then what would keep you going? But I think the more we are all able to see that life isn't actually built in that time scale, that if you think about it in terms of agriculture, it's such a good metaphor, but it's like there's a time of the year when the fields literally just need to be bare, and you just leave them alone. You just chill out and eat what you've harvested. And then there's times to start preparing it and taking out the rocks, and then planting, and then nourishing, and then harvesting. But everyone's always looking for that, the first day of harvest. That's what everyone is fixated on. And I think A, just accepting that is not how life is, but then B, I think an even more meta and probably impactful way of thinking about it is all of those stages are necessary. If you can't even enjoy the fallow field part, you have to at least accept that on a meta level, it is necessary for the harvest phase. You cannot get around it. The only way around is through. And so when you can do that, and when you can allow those different phases to wash through you, think it's just a lot easier on yourself. But there's definitely those times when it's just hard, and you're just gonna have a shitty day, and lean into that too.
100%, because I think what you say applies to many different fields in life, for life in general, but also working in a creative field. You always just see the top highlights, the best case practices, the 5-star reviews, everything. And I think media consumption and the way especially social media works has a huge impact on how we develop a view on life and what's expectations on life could be like. It's not your perfectly Instagram feed all the time, and you have to fail, and you have to fail maybe 100 times before it works out once. And that's a huge part of entrepreneurial life, creative life, life in general. So yeah, but as you said, it's like you can say there's a seasonality to life, or there's a German saying, you live life forward and you understand it looking backwards. So it's kind of like this. You're always looking for narrative structures in your life, but you can't understand them looking ahead. You just have to go through it, I guess, and make sense of it later.
Yeah, I was thinking about this just the other day. The Greek conception for time is the image that you're walking backwards into the future. Very similar for the German conception, but I think English speakers we're very future fixated. We think that we actually have any kind of sight into it, and we just don't.
I also appreciate this Greek idea of two kinds of times, chronos and kairos, like the linear time that just runs by like an hour clock, and then you have like the life events, the more hedonistic approach, the more work towards things that you will remember, right? You have like milestones in your life. So I also appreciate this idea of two conceptualizations of time.
It's just shocking the amount the Greeks got right. There's a reason we're still talking about them. We can complain all we like, but it's pretty wild what happened in that space and time. I mean, you had it in Germany too. That's a fascinating thing. Those historical moments where you just like suddenly have this explosion of thought, and it's just like the historian's task of like, what happened there? What led to that? Which, we could go off on tangents there, but we'll rein it back to
100%,
to the personal. But it's the same in the entrepreneur's life, right?
Exactly.
Like you do. Exactly. I mean, I'm very aware I'm in a burst right now. I'm like, this burst isn't going to last. No way. Like, who knows? Maybe tomorrow it crashes. Maybe a month from now it crashes. I don't know. But it's not going to be like this forever.
Yeah, but you got to enjoy the ride. So, but
you gotta.
Talking about the Greeks and touching on history and all of that let's circle back to your time in academia when you're not only a writer, you're also a classicist, meaning you studied ancient Greek Roman civilization, languages, literature, philosophy, and on your website you have this wonderful sentence that I need to quote. You have 1/3 of a PhD in philosophy and 3/4 of an MFA in fiction. So let's talk about a little bit what your life in academia looked like.
I started off absolutely loving academia. For my undergraduate degree, I went to Sarah Lawrence, and it was like one massive intellectual playground that I couldn't get enough of. Absolutely loved it. And I think because of that experience, and also because of what I perceived my skill set to be, and perhaps a failure of imagination, I didn't really think there were any other options but to go into academia. It's like, well, I like literary fiction, and I like studying dead languages, and I like philosophy. Well, I guess and I like people, so teaching made sense to me. There are a lot of ways in which academia on the surface made sense. I think the really sad reality is I would have loved to have been a white male academic 100 years ago. I think the way that academics or upper education is being structured now, especially in the humanities, I think it's completely falling apart. I don't think it is at all what I was hoping it to be, or to have any kind of the impact that I imagined it would have. And so I graduated from college. I spent a year just kind of working in wine, working retail, applying to graduate programs. I got into Cambridge, which was the enemy school of philosophy from the school that I had been trained in.
Wow, okay.
I thought I was going to be this like great missionary and bridge academic gaps between these competing schools. But then I got to Cambridge and they just like quietly disapproved of me in their British way for the year. And I did the 1/3 of a PhD thing. It's a little tongue in cheek. I didn't completely bail. I stayed for the master's. I got the master's, which I got in that first year. It was an MPhil. And then by mutual decision, I left. I wasn't going to stay on for the PhD because it really, that gap between what I imagined that life would look like and what it actually was just staggering. So then I tried to heal my soul by working as a carpenter under this like ancient carpenter for a year. And then in that year, I got accepted to do this MFA in New Mexico. So then I came down here, did a year of that, wrote a manuscript, and then I got sucked off into my first startup venture, which was actually a philosophy platform. A professor of mine from undergraduate and another alumni approached me asking if I wanted to help co-found this online philosophy platform, which really sort of whet my interest. It was kind of my gateway drug. It was like academia, but in the startup world. So I was like, I could try that. That sounds interesting. And that failed, hard fail. That was my first experience of trying to build a startup and it not working for a variety of reasons. But I think I kind of caught the bug at that point. I was like, wait a second. The way my brain works and what I'm interested in is applicable to this other space. And in many ways, the space is actually a lot better suited for me and me for it. It's dynamic. It's constantly changing. It can be kind of whatever you make it to be. It's very challenging. It's very people oriented, very creative. And so, so then I got really into sort of UX research stuff. I started taking some certificates in that, thought I would just work for other startups. And in the midst had my idea for both and so then I started working on that while I was also just doing contract work and like content strategy and UX writing stuff for other startups. And here we are a couple years later.
Wow. So, but before we dive into what you do today, you said this philosophy platform, it failed. Is there some learning you want to share? What kind of platform was it? What can you say today? What did you learn? Why did it fail?
I'm very sensitive to this because as far as I know, the other two co-founders are still working on it. I think the best way to put it is that there's always a tension in entrepreneurship between good enough and perfect. And with what we were trying to do, which I think could have added so much value to the world, because what we were really doing is before COVID hit, deeply thinking through how do you deconstruct what is going on in a pedagogical moment in the classroom and reconstruct it for an online space, rather than assuming like, oh, just like film a class and put it online and that works. It goes like, no, like what is actually occurring in learning from a philosophical level, and how can you create a new form of that will be better online? We have like a 95,000 word Scrivener document like that breaks down pedagogy and all these different philosophies of pedagogy and all these really interesting tech innovations you could do to create this. That if we had been willing to even put like lo-fi prototypes out and start testing them and like building a customer base, I think would have had a high likelihood of success and also had a really high impact on people's lives. But there was a real disagreement between myself and other members on the team of what was good enough to start putting out into the world. And I think I got to a point of frustration where I was like, we can't argue for 3 months about a single paragraph on an about page. We have to get things into the world, even if it's not the perfect way of saying it. Yeah. We'll never be able to say it perfectly, because that's this interesting conundrum in philosophy is, if you could just say it, you would say it.
Exactly.
I'll leave it at that. And so it presents a really interesting problem, not just from a marketing perspective, but I think from a deeper philosophical perspective of like, how do you create something that is still genuine, but is accessible to the masses? And I cared really deeply about it. I learned a lot in the process. I really hope they succeed. But I reached a point where I was like, I don't really know any better because this is my first startup. I haven't worked on other startups, but I just have a sense that like, this is not a pace that is feasible.
Yeah. Also, I mean, that's the famous saying, better done than perfect, and working with MVPs and having little sprints and all of that. I mean, it's not a very individualistic problem that you had to solve. But yeah, okay, that's super interesting. And my second question is, what did 1 year of carpeting do to you?
I really loved it. Similar to entrepreneurship, I think there's actually a lot of analogies in the sense that you have no boundaries on your life. You're sort of always working and never working. So, like, you have maximum flexibility, but you're always working in academia and the startup world. But with carpentry, it was the exact opposite. You know, I would just show up. I was studying under this just awesome legend of a man. He was like 70 years old and could barely see, but everything by touch, and just understood carpentry so well. And you just like work for a set number of hours, and at the end of the day, a wall would exist, and the wall didn't exist before. And then you would go home and you wouldn't think about it, and something physical existed in the world. And that was so existentially calming. And I think also just feeling more empowered in my body and like capabilities. I think now, having transitioned, I think there is something masculine going on there, but just this feeling that like, yeah, if something goes wrong, like I can fix it. You know, the toilet started leaking the other day, and it's like, well, I've never fixed a toilet, but I'll just like watch a YouTube video and then take apart the toilet and I managed to fix it. And that's an amazing feeling, but I wouldn't have had that confidence if I hadn't have spent this year learning these very basic skills. But like, it's a working vocabulary. It's another language, and it's one that I don't think enough people speak today. So it calmed me, it grounded me, it made me more embodied. It was very existentially calming. And it was a pretty good complement to writing. You know, I'd wake up early in the morning and work on my fiction, and then, you know, go move things around and hammer nails for 8 hours. But I do think long term, as much as I love it, I am quite a cerebral person. So when the next opportunity came along, it felt right.
I love that you had this experience, because it's a lot of creative people or brain workers crave manual labor, and just this experience of, I put something physical in the world. It can be gardening, it can be putting up walls, it can be, like in my case, I need to paint on real canvases, no digital formats, nothing. It's just so, sometimes it's a very existential need to build something in real life. That's amazing. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I think I feel like there's a reason all poets end up writing about gardening. I feel like you just inevitably, if you follow the right path in life, you inevitably garden. That's my statement. That's my line from this podcast.
That's a freaking quote. Amazing.
There we go. Just mic drop. We're done.
Perfect. Thanks. It's a wrap.
You're welcome.
Amazing. All right. So I definitely need a gardening professional for the next episode. Thanks for that hint. I totally go for it.
I can hook you up. I'm in New Mexico. There's a lot of them here.
Amazing. Yeah, that's cool. Let's do it. Okay, but first let's circle back to your entrepreneurial journey. You already talked about, now you founded Both And, which is a clothing brand for transmasculine, non-binary, and AFAB people. And I think it's something that's, with your story as a founder, very connected to your own journey and drawing from your own experience. So maybe you can tell us how you got the idea and how you turned this idea or impulse into a company.
I think it's one of those really classic entrepreneurial situations where I had a problem and I wondered if in solving it, it would help other people.
Yes.
And I had a problem that people in power wouldn't even think to address, which is why I think I was able to kind of be first to market in this space or developing this white space, which is like, it's very simple when you think about it. It's just, if you're trans, you have different body proportions than cisgendered people. I often show this little drawing to investors who are all cisgendered, because most people in power are cisgendered. But it's just sort of like, so for me, as an example, I'm like 5'4", which is average for a person who was assigned female at birth. And I've had top surgery, so I have a flat chest. I've been on testosterone for a few years, so I have more muscle and my fat's moved around a bit. But bone structure never changes. I'm never going to get taller. The proportions of my arms and torso to the widths at my shoulder and chest and hips is never going to change. And the result is that clothing just like simply doesn't fit. Like, and that's even before you layer on this issue of like, how do you want to be read or perceived? Exactly. Like you have to start with fit. And what I saw the fashion industry doing is like literally just window dressing. They're trying to solve it from the entirely wrong angle, which is like, oh, we need to, like, we understand, you know, there's this emergent market, especially with Gen Z. Let's throw a trans person in a marketing campaign. And it's like, if the clothes don't fit, they don't fit. And it doesn't really matter that you happen to have somebody who identifies as trans or non-binary in a marketing campaign. Or the other response has been like, oh, let's have this whole like agender clothing market. Let's just make everyone wear really baggy sweatshirts. It's like, that is not innovation. Sweatshirts were always available to whatever gender. That's just like having us all wear trash bags. Exactly. And so like it started from this very evidence-based design, which to me was just very intuitive mindset of like, okay, I have this problem. I'm going to go out and interview and survey as many people as I could. And I've like since done that with thousands of people to figure out if A, this is a shared problem, and then B, if what we struggle with and what we wish existed is similar enough that you could solve it from a design perspective. And it very quickly became evident that there was like a resounding yes to both of those things. Which was really cool. But then there I was as a person with no background in business and no background in fashion and $5,000 in savings and an idea, and was like, okay, I'm just going to like reinvent the wheel in fashion. Why not? And in retrospect, now that I've learned what I've learned about the fashion industry, the bravado there is insane. It is such a complicated industry. The barrier to entry is so high. There are a lot of reasons people haven't like made this kind of innovation before, but I got really lucky and worked really hard and happened to be in the right place at the right time and did the classic, you know, how do you eat a whale? Just one bite at a time and don't look up kind of a thing. And it's been, you know, precariously working out.
And also it's like the classical hero's journey of a founder, because you are an industry outsider and you just have this urge and this real problem you discovered. Best case scenario, because it was your own problem and you solved it, and then you went apparently all the right steps, which sounds amazing. So let's dive into this. What kind of clothes do you provide today? Do you design them yourself? Do you manufacture them? How does your clothing line look for someone who doesn't know both end yet?
Yeah, so we started with a kind of MVP collection of 3 shirts, t-shirts. We found in our interviews that, kind of surprisingly to me, actually, t-shirts was the most voted thing, design challenge for us to fix. I think because it's kind of the base of a wardrobe. And if you just have like a good t-shirt, like you can wear that year round. And that makes a really big difference in terms of helping people feel better in their body. And it was also kind of a relief to me because it's an easier thing from a design perspective than some of the things we're challenging now, or taking on now. So it really literally started with me compiling all this evidence and then thinking through all the things that have worked for me in shirts and the things that haven't. And so things that I've noticed of like shirts that have a higher collar are really great for covering binders, which like to pull off what they need to do in terms of flattening the chest, they need to come in really tight around the neck. And hips is like the major. Hips is always really the issue proportionally. And what are design things you can do to create illusions of squareness from the waist into the hips, things like that. The quality of fabric you use, like a heavier weight cotton is going to hold structure rather than cling. Things like that, which is like, if you've experienced them in your body, you've noted them, you look for them. But if you're, you know, a 50-year-old cisgender fashion designer, like, why would you think of that? It would never really occur to you. So I basically like just compiled these 3 base designs, literally cutting apart shirts that worked and like stitching them together and pinning them and making these base designs, which were then put into tech packs, which is sort of like the specifications of them with flat sketches, and then started working with manufacturers. And there was a while there that I was like trying to figure it out all by myself. But then I got very lucky and I got introduced to this amazing designer in New York who has been sort of a creative director, design director for a lot of brands over the last 20 years. And he just fell in love with the project, and we really hit it off. And he ended up just building a whole team to come work for us pro bono.
Wow.
So for that whole first year, 2021, we've had this pro bono 4-person design, product development, sourcing, production team in New York. And the flow of it still starts with me doing research and talking to people and figuring out what people really want. And then I bring sort of the concepts to them, or we build out, you know, the initial prototypes, and then they are ultimately manufactured overseas and then shipped to the UK, where we have distribution, and to myself in New Mexico, where we have US distribution. So we have 6 styles right now. They're all upper body wear. That was what we really wanted to focus on first. And then we have a number of other things in the development pipeline that will be released in the summer into the fall, sort of depending on funding. If there's any really wealthy people on this call who want to invest in us, let me know. We'll be able to produce more things.
Awesome.
But yeah, we wanted to just like really fix one problem at a time. So now we've kind of like crushed that first issue. Now we're moving on to the next design challenge.
Amazing. And you also release new fashion items in so-called capsule drops. So is that part of the strategy to release single items or packages at one time, or is this also something like a marketing thing? Like it's a limited edition capsule drop. It sounds super exclusive. I must say that. It sounds perfect.
It's a bit of a mix. I mean, I would like to claim it's all marketing and scarcity mindset. The flip side of that is like we just couldn't afford to produce that much really at any one time. So normally minimum order quantity is around 300 units per style with factories. And so our very first batch, we just did 300 of each of the 3 styles because that's what we could afford. Just kind of test it out. And I really did think that first batch would be like an MVP beta that we would get a lot of feedback on, and then we would need to make a lot of improvements. But there was very few things that actually needed to be improved. It was the community response was pretty wild. We had overshot the dimensions of the shoulder a little bit. We did bring those out a bit. We're still working on like perfecting the collar because that still needs some fixes. But for the most part, people were really happy with it. So as we've grown, we have kind of a twofold strategy of we test out new styles in very limited order quantities. And so it's like limited edition, it's exciting, it's new, there's all the hype around that. But it's also kind of beta. It might not hit, and we're not as invested in that. And then when we see that certain styles are doing really well, then we double down and we manufacture more, we do more colors. And that becomes sort of like over time what we're imagining to be kind of just like the classic both and wardrobe that will live in inventory on the website.
Wow. So what I like about this, you have such a strong brand purpose, and I think both and answers needs and desires of a previously unaddressed audience. So and I think drawing from your own experience and also the surveys you talked about, I feel like you have a very strong bond with your clients and you always are in beta mode and research mode. So if anyone from not the startup industry who likes to be more in touch with clients and learn about their needs, how do you actually conduct this? How do you keep in touch with clients and research things and learn more about how to improve products?
No, it's a good question because I know a lot of people are trying to do this right now. You know, community is such a buzzword, and I genuinely don't know if I have best practices to offer or if I just kind of have this magic sauce from happening to stumble upon a very acute problem in a very interconnected word of mouth community, being a very sort of charismatic, talkative person who like, we don't have, here's an example. We don't have an app that handles returns. Mm-hmm. If people want to return something or exchange something, they email the hello@bothandapparel.com. And like, it's me who's responding. It's not somebody who's like, I've hired for $10 an hour. Like I'm on Zoom calls showing people different fits and sizes for them to figure out what they want. If somebody's returning, I'm figuring out why they're returning it, what we could do to improve. If people leave really good reviews, I'm following up and sending them free product to like thank them for it. Like I'm just like constantly, I think CEOs can really quickly assume that like customer care or whatever you want to call it, even the words we have for it are really derogatory. It's like, that's like a minimum wage outsourced job. Yeah. Whereas I think at least for the start, like, one of the most important things you can do as a founder is be like the first line of contact with your customer because you just know it better and you care more than anyone else. So it's like I was lucky because of the nature of this community and because of how acute the pain problem is, but it's also just been like common good sense to me. It's like, don't design in a vacuum. Don't pretend to understand what people want. Like run surveys, ask for feedback, be open and honest with people. If they want to talk, get on a call with them. Like there's all these things that just strike me as like, just simple. It's just be a good human who cares about the people you're trying to serve. And don't just try and automate it. I remember hearing a story. I think the like CEO of Chick-fil-A or something. I don't know if this is the right one, but I remember hearing a story about a CEO who got to a point in his life where he came in for 40 hours a week, and all he did was sit at his like huge mahogany desk and reply to fan mail. That was it. That was all he did as a CEO.
Okay.
Like handwritten letters, which on the one hand is totally crazy, and I'm not sure I would ever go that far. But on the other hand, like, yeah, if everything else was running, like, maybe.
Why not?
In the dark moments when it's really hard, it is that email I get from somebody who's like, I just wanted to say, I got your shirt today, and I put it on, and I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in my life, like, I saw myself. Like, I get emails like that most days, and that really is what keeps me going. And like, I don't want somebody else to be on the front lines of that. That's my bread and butter.
That's beautifully put. And also I can relate to that very much because it applies to selling physical products as much as it applies to being a service provider. Like in my design studio, it's the same. You could go to a big agency and then you have the great pitch idea from the creative director, CEO, whatever. And then after the first pitch, you get the interns and you get the artists in training or something, and you will never get to the real needs and the real feedbacks. So I think no matter what kind of entrepreneurial journey you're on, staying in touch with the clients and the base of what you do is a very important part. Maybe we all get to the mahogany Chick-fil-A autograph table one day, but I think in building it up and really being invested in this, you can learn so much, especially if you want to innovate. I mean, even if you have a running company and you want to look for chances to tap into a new market, get new clients, innovate on products or services, you always have to go back to the front line and really understand what's going on. You can't outsource that kind of entrepreneurial creativity. Yeah. Hey, sweet people, are you also looking for the sweet spot of your brand? Let's go on a creative journey together to find what makes your brand unique. I offer coachings and workshops to define brand and marketing strategies and to find a meaningful brand story. And once we found that, we can share your sweet spot with the world with outstanding designs and your own engaging media products. Let's find and share your sweet spot to get the clients you really want and turn your customers into fans. Sign up now for a free coaching call on my website. And now, let's get back to the show.
I also think it maybe weirdly comes from, it might be a byproduct of imposter syndrome, in the sense that like a happy consequence. I think academia, one of the most insidious things about it is it really trains you to undervalue your skills. And so I think I've lived with this cognitive dissonance where I don't have low self-esteem. I know I'm intelligent. I know I'm worth a lot. And yet when I've been in the world trying to find traction in my career, I've never felt like that interface in the way that, like, to say I deserve, it feels a little like arrogant, but sort of it's like I know I have so much to give, and it's like never felt like there's like a space in the world that slots into. And so I think there's a certain level of humility and imposter syndrome that comes with that. And whereas other CEOs, maybe they've been climbing that ladder for 10 years and they have those skill sets, and it wouldn't occur to them that they should sacrifice their time and focus to be on chat with customers or whatever. Like for me, it's like I ain't got nothing. I was starting from the bottom. Like first time founder, I don't have a clue what I'm doing. I know I'm good with people, and I know I need people that care about me and this company and this product. So like I'm gonna do whatever it takes. And Absolutely. It just like doesn't occur to me to feel like I'm above that,
And I think that's kind of the sweet spot of staying humble and also not falling into the trap of academia, always being stuck in that Dunning-Kruger effect curve that you think, oh my goodness, there's so much out there. I don't know anything. I'm just a dwarf on the shoulder of giants or whatever. Yeah, absolutely. So, but we touched on marketing already, and I sense that you're a writer, and also storytelling in general plays a huge part in what you do with both and your brand. So what's the approach in terms of brand purpose, communication, and storytelling? How do you approach that?
I knew I wanted, there were a few things. When I started both and, I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but I like the best way I can describe it is like I had a few North Stars. Like I had intuitions about what I had to follow. One of them was that it had to be like aesthetically top of the line. Like when you look at the competitive landscape, we don't really have competition, but like what you could call our competition, no offense to them, make being trans look like you're going rock climbing. Like it just is not aesthetically appealing. There's nothing aspirational about it. There's nothing sexy about it. And it's kind of sad because it feels in a way like we're still asking permission for our bodies as trans people. And it's like all you deserve is a brand that like accepts you for who you are rather than a brand that like accepts you for who you are and also celebrates it. And it's like, fuck yeah. Like it's not just okay to be trans. It's also sexy. It's extraordinary. It's beautiful. And I am not a visual genius. I would say I'm like visually particular. I definitely have an opinion. I know what I like, but I'm not a genius. And so the first thing I did was I called my two friends that are the best visual geniuses I know. One of them, Liron, is like a literal rock star in the design world. She's the creative director at Buck in LA now. And it's like, she's just in a Twitter ad yesterday for this whole NFT art collaboration thing she's been doing. She's really killing it. She studied under Debbie Millman. And I called her literally just to ask what font I should use for our logo, because I didn't know anything more about branding at the time. I was like, I've come up with a name on a hike. What font should I use? And I guess she was the first person I pitched. And within like 10 minutes of talking, she's like, all right, I'm going to do this for you. So she came and like developed our logo and our typography and our color system and like all that brand guideline stuff, and still serves as like our advisory design director. And then I had this other friend, Misha, who's just an incredibly talented photographer. And I really wanted there to be storytelling. I thought that from a research perspective, that was going to be how we were going to understand the need. And I also thought it would be how we would build community and make this about more than just selling a product. And so I called her up and said, I want to start doing this photojournalism series, kind of like a Humans of New York for this community. Mm-hmm. And she got on board. And she resists the title of co-founder. She's not a very businessy person. She's definitely an artist, but she's been my co-founder. She's been with me since day one. She's doing fulfillment in the UK. She's out there like organizing photo shoots in the height of COVID in winter in London. Wow. Like she's really doing it. And I mean, we've won branding awards and stuff. I mean, what her and Liron have been able to do in terms of our aesthetic has definitely set us apart and been an enormous point of leverage for us. And so, yeah, I think there is like the humility of like, I knew I needed this thing and that I couldn't do it. And I didn't have any money. So my piece of advice, make friends with people who have different skill sets from you. I think we increasingly just surround ourselves with similar people with the same skills. And like, I didn't do it for this purpose, but in college, I was just like a very sort of open-minded person who liked a lot of different people. And so I made these friends who now have such diverse skill sets, like my CFO, like thank God I have a friend who's good with numbers and branding and photography and just like everything was literally, I just had friends and I had cared about our friendship and poured time and energy into it. And it was a good enough idea that when this came along, they're like, oh yeah, for sure. Like for some equity, I'm in. I'll work for years without getting paid on this. So I got really lucky there, but I do like that is something I tell people these days of never underestimate how important it is to just connect with people who are really different from yourself.
That's such a good advice, because I know that in terms of staying within your comfort zone, getting positive reinforcement about your opinions, what you do, it seems very comfortable to stay in your bubble, be it professionally, in private life, whatever. But I also draw so much inspiration and drive from people from very different ways of life, different industries, different mindsets, people that you can also in a friendly way argue with them. That's always an opportunity to grow. And especially if you apply it to business, as you just put it perfectly, you should assemble some kind of Avengers team or something of different skill sets. That's really what pushes you forward. So, and you're also a writer and a storyteller. Do you have some kind of strategy? Do you have an outline? Do you think in terms of a hero's journey or a buyer persona journey when it comes to what you communicate in campaigns and on your website and on social media? Or is there any overview, or is it really on a day-to-day basis still exploring what are good ways to tell the story of the brand?
Honestly, I probably should have more of a strategy. I don't. I've definitely learned a lot in the last couple of years. I mean, I think everything is that mentality of try it, test it, learn from it, move on. With the storytelling, there's definitely been some. At first, when I was interviewing people, I was really focusing on clothing itself and what they struggle with. And at a certain point, I realized, okay, I've like really validated, like I'm hearing the same thing over and over and over again. I don't need to really keep hearing this. And I'm interested in hearing a broader spectrum of stories. And so I started shifting interviews more to this photojournalism lens. And I usually start with a very broad, open-ended question that leads in very interesting ways, which is, what is important to you for other people to understand about your relationship to gender? And that just goes in a million different directions. And I love talking to people. I'm very quick at typing, so I can just like transcribe what they're saying while we're talking. And then I just reread our interview afterwards, and I piece together a quote and pair it with a photo, and bada bing, bada boom. So that's like the only strategy of just like really trying to create a space for voice and visibility through that series. But everything else is just, whatever is popping into my brain with the latest ideas around how to communicate messaging. I mean, we do have more stuff planned out this year. We're doing our first campaign video end of March, and I Am Both And campaign, which I'm pretty excited. We're shooting out in LA, and that's a bit more scripted, a bit more of a concept behind that. I just kind of always let the community guide what we do and what we put focus in.
It's amazing. And also it's the beginning of your marketing campaigns also, but what you just described there is your own media format in a way. You found a channel, you have certain editorial ideas on how to input questions to get great results, what visual and text components you need. And that's that's an amazing media product in a way that you created there. I really appreciate that, which is also guiding me to the whole other point of your life, which is writing, which plays a huge part in your life. And so I was really wondering, having 3/4 of a PhD in fiction writing and a bit of philosophy background, how does that come into play in being an entrepreneur and being a creative entrepreneur? I think that makes a huge difference in being able to put things on paper, getting it out of your head, either in interviews and in speaking or also in writing. What do you think? Is that some kind of superpower that you can use?
I think it is. I think I'm only really now realizing it because I'm still crawling out of the hole that academia dug me into. There's my literary fiction, which to me is like, that is the most sacred part of my life, and therefore the most sacred part of the day. My first 2 hours every morning goes into my writing, because that's the most important thing to me. So it's the first thing that comes in the day. Although I do feel very released now. And there's a great irony, which is, not lost on me, that I spent a long time, wanting to be a rich and famous writer and have that be all I do. And then I got to a point in life where I started like diversifying what I was doing and building both and stuff, and didn't put pressure on writing to be something that, financially supported me or led to anything. And then, of course, when I took that pressure off, that started growing. Now I have this great literary agent in New York. I finished this manuscript that a number of editors are interested in. It's like nothing's set in stone. And even if it gets published, I'll probably make very little money, and it'll probably sink without trace, because those are just the stats in the world. But it's sort of like, I started getting published in the Berkeley Review and the Dublin Review, and like all these things started coming together when I stopped making it be the only thing in my life. But it's still the most important thing. So that's how I spend my early mornings. Sometimes I spend it on limbs, which to me is like writing, but also the more academic philosophy part of my brain. And then I get into my regular day, where those skill sets, I think, are absolutely relevant. The way that they manifest. Here's what I think the problem is. I think academia trains you to think that there's only value in what is hard. And when you then go and try and apply these skill sets, like being a really good communicator, being able to synthesize a lot of thought and, boil that down to the question behind the question, which I would argue like all of philosophy is, those are such valid skill sets in the entrepreneurial world, and people will pay a lot of money for them. It never ceases to amaze me how much people will pay me to just write what strikes me as just like common sense, but it's actually magic to them in the way that coding is magic to me. But coming from academia, because it's not hard, because being good at like debating ideas and synthesizing that information and communicating them is just like second nature. I think you come in with a sort of almost double perspective where you're like, but it's easy, so therefore it's not valuable. And that's just not true. There are so many intelligent people out there who can't string a sentence together and can't get in other people's mindsets. And so, like, I realize that's kind of like top layer umbrella. It's not like the brass tacks of day to day. How does it interface? But I just think, what I have to offer at the end of the day is like a person who thinks deeply about things, thinks creatively about things, and is pretty good at coming up with ways to articulate them. And that sounds very simple, but that's actually a really, really important asset.
That's huge. Doesn't sound simple at all to me, but yeah. So now you said you start your day with 2 hours of writing, and I'm also very drawn to investigate creative and entrepreneurial life circles and how people structure their day, and if they're drawn more to routines and strict routines and sticking with them, what role does that play? Or if they're completely free, sometimes sleep in, get drunk in the afternoon and just see what happens. There are two different ways to approach this whole game. And so if you don't mind, let's dig a little bit around in your day. So you start with 2 hours of writing, which is a lot of time. When do you squeeze that in?
Sometimes it's more like an hour and a half, but yeah,
still,
in that range.
It's still a whole movie, right? So when do you squeeze that in? When do you get up? Is that the first thing you do?
Yeah, first thing I do, usually wake up, depends on the season, like somewhere between 5 to 6, usually depending on the season. And for me, I mean, I've been writing almost every morning since I was 13. So it's definitely a muscle for me. I don't, and I've experimented. I put a lot of shame and pressure on myself at the point in my life when I thought I just wanted to be a writer of like, I should be able to write all day. And I actually think very few people are able to do that. I actually much prefer to have my day segmented out and use my brain in different ways throughout the day. But for a long time, I was like, if this is the thing I love the most, I should do it for like 12 hours every day. But I found that golden zone of like an hour and a half to 2 hours. I don't experience writer's block. I just like drop immediately into kind of a flow state. I think creative writing for me is very adjacent to a dream state. So I can't talk to anyone in the morning. Like if I'm trying to make coffee and like my dad is awake, if I'm back in Colorado and he even says hi to me while I'm trying to make coffee in the morning, I'm enraged. It's like, fuck off. Like I'm in my dream state. Do not talk to me because I want to like slip from that into my creative zone. And then I slip into that zone and I stay there for as long as it feels good. I don't push it. And usually the feel good is about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And then I'm done. That's and amazing. Then I'd like dive into the firefighting of, regular day existence. But I'm a pretty regimented person. I don't write on the weekends. I write on weekdays, and there, occasionally things come up and I have to miss it. But I think by and large, I've just found I'm a far happier, more fulfilled person if I make that time in the early morning. And it really is a muscle.
I like what you said, that you stop at the moment when it feels right and don't force it. I recall hearing an interview from a German musician. He's in this legendary German punk rock band, and he shared in another interview one time something that I really recall quite often, because he said whenever he finishes lyrics or musical pieces that he writes, he always leaves at a point where he is amazed to go back to work. So, for example, when he writes lyrics, he always stops at a point where he's really exciting. It's hard to let go then, but you will start the next day with exactly that excitement, and you can't wait to finish up that lines. And the same thing if he composes like 14 songs for an album, he strictly always keeps 2 in his pocket. So for the next album, he has these 2 tracks. He can't wait to start over again. So you don't always have to shoot until there's no more bullets left. I really appreciate the idea of leaving a little surprise for yourself for the next day that keeps you motivated. So I really like it. And it sounds like you're doing the same thing.
I have this phrase that I say semi-facetiously, but not even. It's real. I like to leave a museum half an hour before I'm ready to go. like every time. That's
Awesome.
my thing in life. And I think it's the exact same sentiment. I think when you try and squeeze the most juice or inspiration or joy out of something, you leave it dry. You need to leave something back in there for it to, bud and create new seeds. So yeah, completely on board with that sentiment.
Awesome. Yeah, this brings me, talking about writing in your routines, brings me to the last big thing I want to talk about, because you have a project on the side. You're co-founder of Limbs, a monthly exploration of a word, which looks from the outside to me like a very artistic and creative way to explore a thought or a word. It's a combination of an image, an artwork, and texts. So what is Limbs? How did this amazing project come to life?
Well, I've always just been really obsessed with etymology. I think that was probably like the intersection of my interest in writing and classics, and in learning Greek and Latin, and just, as Anne Carson says, like scrabbling around at the roots of language. To me, was always, it was a way to always reinstill curiosity in my life. And so I think that was like that's the core ethos behind Limbs, is like, I'm not trying to give people information or facts. I think there's plenty of content out there about information or facts. What I want is like this little doorway into curiosity, that I could take a single word, I could use its etymology or its roots and the way that it's changed throughout time as this jumping off point. But I'm not like a linguist. I'm certainly not qualified to like truly talk about the etymology of words. This is information anyone could access just by Googling these words. But like, when you start examining it, when you see that the word temple comes from to cut, and you realize that it's related to these Roman augurs who used to go out and watch birds fly through a patch of the sky that they were like literally cutting a square in, and then this like sort of metaphorical space then became a literal space on earth. Like, that's so interesting, this idea of like what we make sacred and how we have to cut it out from the rest of the world. So it's honestly, it's like stream of consciousness for me. It is not this laborious research-based task. I just take a word, I look at its etymology, and I let my brain go wild of where it leads. And then I bring on a visual collaborator to pair, photography or illustration or whatever with the piece as like another way to think it through. I will say, in complete honesty to you, I love Limbs, and it's something that I struggle to give the time or attention it deserves, specifically in finding artists to collaborate with, because that's not my background and I've already used the friends I have. I need a wider network of artists to collaborate with, and I'm so busy with my other projects that it's like every month I'm like, okay, I'm going to get a few posts ahead, I'm going to go find more artists and spend more time engaging online and stuff. And it's like I keep thinking, maybe I need to let this one go, and then something like this happens where I have this small but very loyal audience of subscribers who really love it. And like, I've paused it once or twice, and then people will reach out to me being like, where's Limbs? Like, why are you publishing? I'm like, well, if even 5 people are loving this, then like I should keep doing it. But it's like, I feel like it's the last vestige of the academic world in my life. And I really love it. And I also am acutely aware that it's kind of like a little malnourished baby that needs to be given more in order to grow.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely put this up in the show notes, and happy to recommend you to some artists. Yeah. Absolutely. I'll do this after the show. I'll recommend some people to you. And I really love that you brought up the temple symbol, because when I looked at Limbs, I had to think about, really weird, but I had to think about augury, this ancient Roman religion thing where they watched for omens in the way birds behave. And it's so mystical and so abstract, but it just strikes people with so much curiosity. I really appreciate it. So yeah, people check out Limbs, subscribe, and absolutely, it's amazing. Yeah. Well, Finn, I only have 2 more questions left for you. 2 questions I ask.
Great, and then I'll go eat my first meal of the day before I pass out.
You definitely should. Okay, it's 2 quick questions actually. The first one is a question I ask all my interview guests. Is there something that you would like to recommend to you and the sweet people listening? What inspires you right now? Can be literature, fiction, movies, books, talks. Is there something you'd like to share with us?
I recently read 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Berkman. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's kind of like going through a bit of a literary like mania. Like it's sold out on Amazon, like when our books sold out on Amazon kind of a thing.
Wow.
But I don't want to say too much about it because I think it will spoil it. I think it's the most soulful and existentially calming reflection on sort of the zeitgeist of how we think about time in the modern age of anything I've read. And it's not that it says things that I had never considered intellectually. I think often what is profound to us is something that's very simple that just happens at the right time. And I think this book is that. It's like, it's not like reading Joyce, but it's reading a very well-structured, very thoughtful, very elegant piece of wisdom that 99% of the people I know need to hear right now. So that's not so much artistic as just like read this if you want to feel better in your life and stop freaking out all the time. But like we all need that. So like read the book.
Holy shit, that's a pitch. Amazing. So that's all we need to hear.
Oliver Berkman, I want a commission.
Amazing. And also I'm super interested in what's happening next. What's happening next with both ends? You publishing more writing, what's happening to Limbs, what can we look forward to?
Both and I think this year will be hopefully a really big year in terms of growth, both in terms of reach and also in terms of like being out of, I think, like test phase of like, do we have product market fit to like, yes, we do. Here we go. Here's more styles. Let's grow this. So, you know, I have a lot of hope around that. Also a lot of anxiety. It keeps me up late at night and forces me to reread 4,000 Weeks. But that's hopefully what's next there. Limbs, you know, hook me up with some artists and I'll double down on it. I mean, I think that's actually an interesting thing is I was originally doing it once every 2 weeks and then I had to switch to once a month because I couldn't find enough artists to keep up with it. But it is the kind of contact that I think ideally would be much more regular. I think it's sort of, I don't know if you read Brain Pickings by Maria Popova, but that's sort of like Sunday newsletter that shows up and is like this consistent way of thinking in the week. I do think, you know, consistency is key. So we'd like to build that out and then fingers crossed that the latest version of this manuscript gets picked up by a publisher. I feel very proud of this manuscript and really hope it finds a good home.
Fingers crossed for all of your projects. We're definitely going to keep an eye out for all of your things. Finn, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure to be on it. And would love to help out however I can with all of your endeavors too. So let's talk.
Same to you. Thanks. Wow, sweet people, that was my talk to Finnegan Shepard. I really appreciated talking to him. And what will stick with me is how he folds in his experience from different fields, from philosophy, literature, writing fiction, into the storytelling aspect of his brand, and also how he used his own struggles and own problems to create something positive and to found a company on that. That's it for this week. I'll be back next Wednesday when I talk to Michael Ehrenwirth, the German brand ambassador for the spirits brand Linie Aquavit. We'll be talking about how to reinvent a traditional brand, what it takes to be a brand ambassador, and Michael gonna share some amazing drink recipes with us. Take care, people, and have a sweet week.
This podcast is produced by Sweetspot Studio. New episodes each week, wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you enjoyed the show, leave a rating and subscribe to never miss an episode. Find out more at sweetspot-studio.com.